Hello, we're the editors of Queer Spaces, an atlas of LGBTQIA+ places and stories published by the RIBA.
My name's Nathaniel Furman. I'm an artist and designer.
And I'm Joshua Mardell. I'm an architectural historian.
Queer Spaces is a landmark publication with 100 spaces from all over the world, spread over 200 years, and written by
55 international contributors through really jargon-free, lean prose and lavish illustrations.
accessible, hopefully enjoyable by anyone, and available from RIBA Books, RIBA Books Bookstore, and other reputable stores. Hi, we're Josh and Adam at the RIBA Bookstore, here to talk about Queer Spaces, a book that we've been working on for quite some time, and we're extremely excited to have coming out now. So we're going to ask each other some questions on this very appropriately made notes. The first one, which I have for you, Josh, is what was the process behind the book?
I think initially it was about contemplating in our own mind what we wanted to include, what we can achieve in a book project with this title. One of the first things I think we did was actually just started brainstorming queer spaces that we're familiar with, that we felt ought to be represented, and it was largely a process of approaching people, which involved being actually quite bold, approaching people, tapping into our existing networks, and then from there kind of trying to think about where the gaps lie and trying to plug those gaps so that we're making it as broadly representative as we possibly could.
Because I remember we came up with a series of spaces which I guess was somewhat expected because it was our area of knowledge. I think I was surprised by some of the spaces that you proposed, and you were surprised by some of the spaces that I proposed. But the journey, for me at least, the journey of going and accessing our networks of friends, colleagues, their colleagues,
Yes.
and kind of going down rabbit holes of WhatsApp groups and email chains and finding incredible people in sort of quite remote parts of the world and the architectural community. That sort of fishing, that sort of dragnet fishing around the world brought back some really odd creatures that we then had to categorize and put together, and that was where it got really exciting for me, where we had to sort of come back to our initial list and it sort of grew into this tentacled, amazing, beautiful monster.
Yes, but I think one of the major challenges was actually thinking to ourselves, okay, what's missing that's vital and enable us to try and tell a holistic story? So, for example, we had inevitable absences that we were trying to plug in Africa, which was naturally a very difficult journey intellectually. We were trying to have less elite spaces, etc. So I think
and we weren't entirely successful on some of them. So I mean, Eastern Europe is something that we still, on version 2 of the book,
yeah,
we will like to have a whole section on Eastern Europe.
I guess the other thing to say was just also that it was quite difficult choosing how we would present the book, how to organise it.
Yeah.
It sort of resisted a kind of chronological approach. It resisted a geographical approach. In fact, we tried to, in spite of it being called an atlas, we wanted it to be absolutely transnational in its configuration.
We also wanted to avoid a typological organisation.
Exactly. So in that queer way, it sort of resisted all those conventional ways of organising books, and so in the end we went for what we're calling, I suppose, a scalar or scala, I don't know how to pronounce it, approach. So we're looking at different scales of queer experience. Within and also outside the book, is there a particular queer space that really spoke to you, that somehow inspired you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, queer space was really important for me when I was sort of in my mid to late teens, not being able to go to school and having a space where I felt affirmed, where I couldn't be safe in public space per se, or in the area I was living or in school. But I went to a gay pub every day and I studied for my A-levels there, and it was filled with a sense of joy and a sense of belonging. And I was being told that it was a place where I was told that what I was not disgusting. It didn't have to be pummeled into the ground, but it was actually brilliant. And there was a whole culture there, and that was hugely important to me, and that led to sort of my discovery of the queer scene in London, and it saved me effectively. I probably wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. So there's a space in the book that I keep coming back to, which is the ice cream store Coppelia in Havana, which is this huge, monumental 1960s Pierluigi Nervi inspired dome right in the middle of the city, which is the world's largest ice cream stall, and that's I think it was the sort of centre of the socialist regime's symbolic space, because it was meant to be luxury for the masses, because ice cream was a symbol of capitalist wealth in the United States and in Canada, where Castro had been, but he was providing it at better quality, at very low prices for the masses, and I think a huge number of flavours, like 1,000 flavours or something. And while the regime was putting homosexuals into concentration camps at the time, this actually became occupied for cruising by the queer community, and different coloured ice cream flavours became symbols for different sexual preferences, and different combinations of different ice cream colours became symbols of different fetishes and preferences. And this place was in the centre of the regime, surrounded by government ministries and buildings, became the core of the queer community that were occupying it all the time. And even to this day, it's still apparently, according to IBAN, which is amazing, an important place, because it's one of the few areas in the centre of Havana where there's free Wi-Fi, so people can access Grindr and stuff. So it's sort of still important to the community, and I just love that. I just love that. Is there for you a particular space that you responded to on a personal level in the book?
On a personal level, yes, that's interesting. I think probably the first space that I actually commissioned or tried to include was the Black, Lesbian and Gay Centre in Peckham, in southeast London. And actually it started as an organisation, I think, called the Black, Lesbian and Gay Centre, and originally they had a little annex in Tottenham Town Hall. Tottenham's in North London, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, in Tottenham Town Hall. And they had some funding from the Greater London Council, and it was an organisation really that provided counselling for queer identifying black people in the London area. But they struggled for a long time to try and find a permanent space, in fact, because of various discriminatory landlords, as you can well imagine. And it wasn't until 1992 that they arrived at a space in Peckham, under the railway arches, just off the Bellenden Road. And it's this wonderful area of kind of industrial archaeology that is now a sort of cultural hub for Peckham. But for me, for someone, when I moved to London in 2010, I went straight to Peckham, and that was my kind of gayborhood. So in a sense, I found that that built environment that I responded to had this incredible queer pedigree that I found out only later. So in that sense, I rather responded to it. And the beautiful thing about that space as well is that although it had to close down, I think in the mid-1990s, they rerouted the telephone to someone's home, to one of the volunteers' homes, and it continued to ring for many, many years. And Adam was talking about a kind of sort of life-affirming nature of queer spaces, of the pubs that he visited. And I think this is very true also of the Black, Lesbian and Gay Centre in Peckham.
What do you hope the book achieves?
I think that's a really beautiful question. I think it should be a go-to source. I think it should be a new way of conceiving of the survey book. So I think what it should achieve is finding a legitimate space between the boards of our book, between the mint green boards with rainbow foil, between those boards. It has a sort of it's a way of legitimating queer experiences that haven't been chronicled in the past, that haven't found their chroniclers, that have been somehow left out of the history. So I think it is a major kind of revisionist work, and it is a vital source of retrieval. I think of it almost like rather similar to a sort of global history, like something like Bannister Fletcher, that at least used to be on everyone's bookshelf. It's mapping no less subjectively the world of architecture and space through queer experience.
It's a personal thing. So I went through architecture school, like many queer people who want to design queerly in a way that is obviously different. Okay, so not just in your history and theories doing an essay about queer space, but actually doing projects which are in some way inherently queer. Being a student in the 2000s, one would have hoped it would be quite progressive, but actually being ridiculed and othered at pretty much every step of the way. And every single time I would want to present an idea for a project, I wouldn't have the instant access to a canonical list of incredible references, which all of the other students had access to, that would give a substantive base to what I was proposing. So in a way, I was starting from scratch every single time I was proposing something, and I had references which were from the literary world, from the art world, because those were the kind of worlds that I was operating within as a queer individual, and I was trying to bring them into architecture. But they don't give you the basis in architecture school or in education to present yourself as architecturally serious. Whereas everyone else just had the canon, the kind of series of brilliant, I don't know whether it be postmodern architects or modernist architects or neo-Gothic architects or parametric architects, kind of the lineage is there and the theory and the intellectual basis is there. But to have a sort of easily accessible queer history, a series of case studies, references, a canon, which you could take to your crit and say, look, these are serious, important, relevant, incredible spaces, architects, designers, artists, thinkers, that I'm referencing in my stuff, which you might dismiss as being looking ridiculous, but you cannot dismiss because it's historically significant. That would have made all the difference to me. So it's really, really meaningful that this book is present and can be used.
I would add to that, I think it is a major addition to the canon, if you like, of acceptability.
Yeah.
And I think it's an almost radical revisionist act.
What is queer in architecture?
It's a very difficult question to answer in a way, and that's the beauty of it. I think, as a question, I think it resists fixed definitions, and I think one should continually queer the meaning of queer, in a sense. I think certainly it's the destruction of the normal, and I think queer in architecture, the way I see it, is in opening up what architecture can be to those who are marginalised. So queering sources, queering spaces is a way of finding those left out of the existing narrative so far.
And giving them a platform and
Yeah.
history. For me, it's coming back to me as a sort of practitioner in design or architecture and design. I mean, on the one hand, there's in the book, queer specifically as spaces for or by people who are gender non-conforming in some way, trans, or have different sexualities than heterosexual, and that's kind of the overall kind of very, very broad definition of the things that we have felt comfortable including. But then also from my perspective as a practitioner, it's very important that there is space within architecture for people of different backgrounds, and as well as people who are queer, to be able to express themselves within the profession. And what I mean by that is that there is a space to not only exist as a queer person and be employed, for instance, or not have to hide or be in the closet, but actually to actively participate in the creation of architectural symbology, space, and aesthetics. Because architecture fundamentally is an aesthetic project, otherwise you're just working in the building industry. So Josh, for you, who is the book for?
So I think the book is about untold stories of difference, and it's for anyone who perhaps identifies as different or as unrepresented in the way architecture has been told up until now. And what about for you? Who was the book for?
Everyone on the book worked really hard for all of the contributions and essays to be jargon-free,
Yeah.
accessible, but deep, profound, very interesting, but so that done in a way so that anyone could go into the book with all of the images, they could access it on that level, but also the essays and the texts could be understood by anyone without any background necessarily in queer studies or even in architecture. But at the same time, if you do have knowledge about architecture, you would see the kind of threads that we were inserting ourselves within, the kind of problems that within architectural history and architectural production that we're trying to ameliorate.